The news broke early on a quiet Sunday morning. Dakota Johnson marries Chris Martin in an intimate ceremony by the sea. The words flashed across every headline, spreading faster than wildfire through Hollywood and beyond. Photos soon followed. Dakota in a soft white dress, smiling under the golden light, Chris holding her hand as guests applauded. It was beautiful, serene, and completely unexpected. For most of the world, it was a moment of joy, the final chapter in a love story that had blossomed quietly and gracefully. But somewhere across the ocean, in London, Jamie Dornan was on set, filming a new project when the news reached him. A journalist mentioned it casually during a break, expecting nothing more than a polite response. Instead, Jamie froze for a split second, just long enough for the cameras to catch the flicker in his eyes. He smiled afterward, nodded, and said softly, almost to himself, "This is a shock to me." It wasn't anger. It wasn't bitterness. It was something quieter, disbelief mixed with a sudden wave of nostalgia. The crew went silent for a moment before Jamie, ever the professional, composed himself and carried on with the interview. But the internet had already caught it, that one sentence, that single expression. Within hours, clips of Jamie's reaction were everywhere. Fans replayed the footage, analyzing his tone, his eyes, the way his smile didn't quite reach his face. Was it surprise? Sadness? Regret? For those who had followed Jamie and Dakota's story since the 50 Shades era, the moment felt deeply personal. Their connection had always been magnetic, a mix of vulnerability, trust, and something unspoken. The kind of chemistry that didn't fade when the cameras stopped rolling. They had spent years together, not as lovers, but as creative partners who had to bare their souls in front of the world. Through every interview, every premiere, every whispered rumor, they had each other's backs. It was the kind of bond that left an imprint. So when Jamie said, "This is a shock to me," it wasn't because he hadn't moved on. It was because part of him had always believed that whatever they shared, that rare, undefinable connection, would always exist, untouched by time or distance. And now, suddenly, it felt like that chapter had quietly, permanently closed. Later that day, a member of the crew said Jamie was unusually quiet between takes. He wasn't sad, exactly, just reflective. He kept to himself, sitting near the window of his trailer, scrolling through headlines he probably wished he hadn't opened. There was a photo that caught his attention. Dakota laughing with Chris, wind in her hair, sunlight on her face. She looked happy, genuinely, effortlessly happy. Jamie stared at it for a long moment before turning off his phone. "She deserves that," he murmured, though no one was around to hear him. People close to him have always said Jamie is a man of few words, but when he does speak, he means it. His reaction, the shock, the quietness, wasn't about lost love. It was about something deeper, the realization that time had truly moved on. For years, fans had speculated about them, the glances, the shared laughter, the protective gestures. But behind the curtain, there was only mutual respect and a friendship built on understanding the weight of fame and the fragility of connection. They had lived through something unique together, something that no one else could ever really grasp. And yet, even the strongest bonds can fade into memory when life changes direction. That evening, as the headlines continued to swirl, Jamie finally addressed the topic again, this time in a short chat with a local journalist. His words were simple, but sincere. "I'm happy for her. Dakota's always been someone who deserves peace. She's found that, and that's a beautiful thing." It was the kind of statement that ended the speculation, yet somehow deepened the emotion. Fans flooded social media with old clips, the behind-the-scenes laughter, the way Dakota once said, "Jamie will always be my favorite co-star." And for the first time in years, the world seemed to remember them not as Christian and Anna, but as two real people who had once shared something rare. That night, Jamie returned to his hotel. He poured a glass of wine, stood by the window overlooking the city lights, and let out a long breath. There was no sadness in his eyes, just quiet acceptance. Because sometimes, the greatest shock isn't that something has ended. It's realizing that, somewhere along the way, it already had. The following days passed like a slow blur. Everywhere Jamie went, someone seemed to mention the wedding. It wasn't malicious, just casual chatter, but each mention felt like a small echo of something he had already tried to let go. By midweek, his publicist gently informed him that reporters were asking for a statement. Jamie hesitated. He didn't want to feed the headlines, didn't want his words twisted into something dramatic. But silence, he knew, would only make the speculation worse. So he agreed to one short interview, not about her, but about life. It was filmed in a quiet corner of a London hotel, the lights soft and warm. The interviewer, careful and calm, eventually asked, "Jamie, there's been a lot of attention around Dakota's wedding. Fans have been curious. How did you feel when you heard the news?" Jamie smiled faintly, his voice low but steady. "I think it's impossible not to feel something when someone you've shared such a big part of your life with moves into a new chapter," he said. "But it's not sadness. It's gratitude, really." He paused, as if weighing his words carefully. "Dakota and I went through something extraordinary together. It shaped us both, and seeing her find happiness, that's not a shock anymore. It's just a reminder that time moves on, and that's how it should be." The clip went viral within hours. The tone in his voice, sincere, measured, with just a hint of nostalgia, struck a chord with millions. Fans around the world flooded social media with comments like, "He still cares, just differently now," and "This is the closure we didn't know we needed." But away from the cameras, Jamie stayed quiet. That evening, he took a long walk through Hyde Park, the kind of walk you take when your heart feels heavy but calm. The air was crisp, and autumn leaves crunched beneath his shoes. Somewhere in the distance, a street musician was playing an acoustic version of Fix You, one of Coldplay's most famous songs. He stopped for a moment, listening. The irony wasn't lost on him. Maybe once, the sound would have hurt, a reminder of Dakota's new world, her new love. But now, it felt oddly fitting. There was something healing about it, as if the universe had quietly decided to wrap everything in gentle symmetry. He smiled to himself and whispered, "Good for you, DJ." Later that night, Jamie sat in his kitchen, scrolling through old photos on his phone. The ones from press tours, behind-the-scenes shots, laughter frozen in time. He lingered on one image, Dakota leaning on his shoulder, both of them laughing uncontrollably between takes. It wasn't about romance. It never had to be. It was about connection, rare, complicated, and real. People often mistook closeness for love, but what Jamie and Dakota had was something else, respect built through vulnerability. They had trusted each other during the hardest parts of fame, during scenes that blurred the lines between fiction and reality. And perhaps that trust had been its own form of love, the quiet kind that doesn't need a label. As the night grew still, Jamie closed his phone and exhaled deeply. Somewhere between the shock and acceptance, he realized something. He wasn't mourning Dakota. He was simply saying goodbye to an era, to the person he was when they first met, to the young man trying to navigate fame, to the whirlwind that had defined so many years of his life. In a recent magazine feature, a journalist later asked Jamie what he learned from the experience of watching someone from his past find happiness elsewhere. He replied simply, "Love changes form. Sometimes it ends. Sometimes it stays, just differently. But if you truly cared about someone, you'll always wish them peace." That quote became one of his most shared. It wasn't poetic or dramatic, just quietly true. The following weekend, Jamie attended a film premiere. Reporters expected the usual quick smiles, the polite answers. But as he stood on the carpet, dressed sharply, the lights reflecting in his eyes, he seemed lighter. Someone asked one last question about Dakota, a simple, "Do you still keep in touch?" He paused, smiled, and said, "We'll always have a friendship that doesn't need words." And that was all. As he turned toward the photographers, flashes lit up around him, freezing his expression in that single moment, calm, wistful, but at peace. Later, An entertainment site captioned the photo. "He's not heartbroken. He's grateful." That night, as Jamie returned home, he opened his window and let the cool air in. The city hummed quietly below, and somewhere, faintly, a Coldplay song played in the distance. He listened for a moment, then smiled, not with longing, but with understanding. Because sometimes, shock fades. And what's left isn't pain, it's peace.